Welcome to the second part of the integration refactor. Like I say, this is the second part being filmed. In reality, we've had quite a few parts. I didn't really record all of these parts, but I thought it would be a good motivational tool. But as you can see here, the identification. So I keep calling integration. I mean identification. You can see that there's several sets of commits here with identification related work. So it's been going on for a little bit. It's supposed to be one of those quick things on the side, like everything else in Dogen. It always ends up being more complicated than we expect. So in the last video, we focused on the physical model, talking about which we need to reopen the text.cpp. Focused on the physical model and we concluded the removal of all the identification related types from the physical model, and we moved them to, well, we used the ones in the actual identification model. Now we need to do something similar for the logical model. So and that is kind of the last, well, the major bits of work. After that, there's going to be a lot of small cleanups and tidy ups and so on. Let me go back to where we were. Oh, actually, before we go anywhere else, let's just go back to our time tracking system. We'll probably start at 45, maybe. Yes, as you can see, the bulk of this sprint has really been taken with this work on the identification model, which was really not part of our sprint goals. We were supposed to be working on these guys here, but once we started doing this cleanup, suddenly, before you knew it, we got stuck in it, and it just seemed sensible to try to get to the bottom of it. Just make sure that the music is not too loud. 35 should be fine. So there we are. Now then, the reason why the logical model is going to be the hardest bit is because we make use of a lot of types here. And there's no easy way to do this. You can't just like do one type at a time, or it's not so easy to break this down. The core types that are really going to be a problem are going to be location, name, and name tree, I think. And all the associated types such as fully qualified representation and things like that. That plus the fact that all the containers that we got are using probably just strings. As you can see here, these guys are all strings, and they should really be logical IDs, like these guys here. So it's a fair bit of work, really. Let's just see how much we can get done in this video. It's definitely not going to be the beginning and the end of this. We're going to take exactly the same approach as we did before, which is painful, but it kind of worked. And that is to just big bang, really. Try to get rid of these types, rename them, use the other types in identification, get something to compile, commit temporarily, and keep moving till we get to the end of it. So let's see how far we can get today. So, okay, the first thing we're going to do then is to try to understand what did we do with the fully qualified representation. So, don't really have a fully qualified representation anymore, but we have something else takes its place, which is qualified representations, right? So we have these different types of qualified representations, right? So, well, let's get cracking, I guess. Presumably the names are already... Oh, okay, the other thing we did as well, which is going to be a bit of a big break with what we've done in the past, is in the past the logical name contained oh, and it still does, okay, so that's not too bad. Alright, cool, okay, so it's not too bad. So I think we just need to basically replace name and name tree. Although having said that, I don't see any evidence of name tree here. Oh, there is logical name tree. Okay, cool. So let's just see what happens then. So we're just going to start removing stuff. It's scary when you start this because, of course, easy to delete, right? But it's not exactly trivial to get these things to then work. but hopefully we will find our way. So don't really want these guys here. Okay, so it looks like an easy removal, not that many types really, but sadly these are very core types to the type system, to the domain model. And now while we're here, let's have a look at who's using stateful. So I know that element, probably just object, I think. Yeah, it's just object. Okay, cool. So let's just do a very minor tidy up of this model then. I don't really want to do too much tidying up because of course we're still going to change a lot, so something like this. Okay, so we now know that the meta name becomes something like logical meta name. And that's in the identification entities, presumably. Logical meta name. You can see everything is going to grow now, so you just need to do these things one at a time. And the name becomes a logical name, of course. Okay then, so now we need to organize things here slightly. Probably a good idea to just get really to go somewhere else. Of course, as I say, the future is that we don't really support UI as much, really. I mean, Dia has been really helpful, and I must say, it's been years since we're using Dia, and I can't really complain. Dia is a great tool. But the more you start modeling, the more you realize that actually the advantages of graphical representation, and I don't mean this in terms of that I don't think we should model using graphical tools. I think that graphical tools are very useful, and creating models graphically, since you use UML and so on, is a very, very useful tool. However, what you really want is to just you want something that can be converted or represented as UML for displaying purposes, but whose underlying format is editable in text form. That's really the ideal sort of position in the world. You don't really want to be spending time organizing things in diagram. You want some tool that does that for you. And most of the time, really, all this work you're doing now, for example, will be much, much easier if you're doing it in the text file, especially if you were in Emacs, because all the search and replaces, all of the power you get with Emacs, especially if you had LSP mode as well. It would allow you to very quickly do all the changes without having to worry about where things are and so on. You could just go through the diagram in 5 seconds, write some macros, and away you go. Which is not the case when you're using a graphical tool, really. You're dependent on the functionality that people have exposed for you. A lot of times it's not really what you need. Okay, so what have we done then? We've changed nameable, and we changed meta nameable, and now we have to change the name trees, which are going to exist instead of the attributes. So where we are, so that just needs to be a logical name tree. So far so good. We didn't really have a lot of things to change. Sadly, I think this will change in a second. Now, one wonders if it's a good idea to just update all of the containers as well. I think we should just do that, really. Might as well bite the bullet. So each of these containers, now this is where the diagram is going to get bent out of shape. So this is a logical ID, really. We can see immediately here it's much more useful to have a domain type here rather than string, because now, I mean, what was this string? In fact, we don't even know. I think it's a logical ID, but it could have been a meta ID, and it must be a logical ID. But, you know, as an external observer, you'd struggle to understand what these strings represent. really primitives are going to clarify the domain model a fair bit, I think. Although, of course, there's a pain of introducing them. To be honest, I think in many ways I'm beginning to realize that the best way is to start coding from the beginning with primitives, really, even when you're not too sure. And then it's rather do that than introduce primitives at the end, because once you do, there's a lot of breakage that comes with introducing primitives, really. Right, so it seems like we haven't got enough space for this, so perhaps we can just move yet another of the problems of UIs. You can see here we now need to faff around with the UI a little bit. Not too much, I don't think. See how much space we need. Of course, we're probably going to have this problem in pretty much all of these things here. Most of them, anyway. Nonetheless, let's try move enumeration out of the way. Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of ceremony related to the UI. Just getting things in the right place. And then, of course, if you're an OCD person like me, that's even worse, because then you end up spending a lot of time just trying to get things in the right positions, in the right order. And then if something is off by a little bit, then it's distracting and you can't actually continue doing the work, because now you're thinking something is not right with my diagram. So as you can imagine, that's not really where you want to be spending time. What you really want is a tool that gives you a diagram, and that diagram to obey to some conventions that you consider useful. Just like for example, we use Clang format, I guess. No one really wants to spend time formatting code. What you really want is a tool that just formats the code for you. And that's what we're going to move towards, really, in the end. Okay, so we now know that should be a logical ID. Similarly here. As you can imagine, this is going to cause all sorts of breakage. Let's just do all of these so we can have a better idea of space. So probably can't make much space from the one above. This also will need a fair amount of space. So what we'll do is we just get all of the code to generate. That will be our first commit. Not very ambitious commit, really. Lots of errors, but it doesn't really matter. We just want this generated code to generate, really. And that will be an achievement in itself. And then once we've done that, we can move over to trying to actually fix problems. So with this guy here, we've got plenty of space at the bottom, so I think we can get away with it. What we'll do is we'll just move things around a little bit. Perhaps a bit higher. And as you can see, this is the sort of difficult part of using the UI. Just getting things in a position where you're comfortable with it. To be fair, of course you could say, oh, there's other tools there that do a lot of the work for you, UI-based tools. Like if you're older, you probably remember rational rows and that kind of thing. I actually prefer to DIA to those kind of tools with lots of intelligence, because the good thing about DIA is that because DIA is not very clever, it's very flexible. For instance, plugging Dogen into DIA was really easy, because DIA was designed to allow you to do whatever you wanted, really. Whereas I'm sure that if we tried to do something similar to this in rational rows, it would have been quite a difficult thing to do. Mainly is because these tools are designed to do one thing and that's it. Now then, let's see how we can make some space here. We'd probably gain some space at the top. Half of this work is quite exploratory, just trying to understand. But one good thing about the UI, I must say, as much as I'm moaning about UIs, one thing I must say that I quite enjoy about the UI is because you spend so much time faffing around with the type system, you know, just moving things around and trying to understand what things mean, or whatever, where they should go, and so on. The good thing about it is that I actually spend a lot of time thinking about the types. I mean, you may not look like you are, but as you are moving these things around, in your head, what you're doing as well is you're saying, well, what's this type? What does it do? Why is it here? And if it's really, really hard to get things in the right shape, then the other question you start asking yourself is, why are the relationships between these types so complicated that I can't actually visualize in the diagram? And as much as it may sound silly, that's actually really useful, because what you then realize is you realize there's something wrong with the design. And I remember a Kevlin Annie talk where he was talking about structural programming, and in some ways it's got similar properties in the sense that the diagram shows you the structure of your code. To an extent, of course, this is not 100%, but I mean, you try to as much as possible to make it close to the structure. And if the diagram is very messy, perhaps it's trying to tell you that your code, the domain model, is actually really messy. So as much as I disparage UI tools, and you know, I find it a bit tedious to be moving things around and not being able to use Emacs for this kind of stuff, I also think there are some advantages in this approach. They were not very obvious. If you were to ask me when I started doing this sort of stuff, I never even considered it. But now that I've done it for a bit, I have now realized that there is actually value in moving types around in the UI, purely, if nothing else, because it gives you a very good view of your type system. So for example, here we probably can get away making this a bit smaller. It really shows you how your types connect to each other and what they're doing. And a lot of times it makes you think, I mean, am I really doing the right thing? And I think that's a useful thing, actually. So let's try to understand what's the right height here, probably where it was, to be honest. So yeah, as you can see, well, I think as with everything, nothing is quite as straightforward as you think. Sometimes you think something is very obvious, but turns out there's more to it than you may realize. So, okay, this is probably good enough for now. The other thing as well to remember is, as much as everyone is OCD, you can't get things perfect. It just doesn't exist. So a lot of the times what you really need to do is to say, well, this is good enough to control my OCD. I'm satisfied that I can appease my OCD enough. It's not going to be what you wanted, but also better than how it was before. So just do enough. So in this particular case, we need a bit of space at the bottom. So what we'll do is we will move these guys here. It's also good to have this in the video, because I think most of the time in our videos in Dogen we focus a lot on the code generator and the coding and so on. And I'd like you to actually see everything, see how the whole thing hangs together. Because I suspect that what happens with a lot of these approaches is that people tell you all the good things, and they forget to tell you how you actually use it in practice, the kind of problems you're going to face. So in that way, I think it's really good that you're seeing behind the scenes how it works, because when you're doing a serious project, if you were to consider Dogen for a serious project once we finish with our thesis, probably want to see the boring side of it as well, just so you know at some point you might get stuck doing this sort of stuff. It's not just the glamorous side of it. And I think all software projects have got that, right? So you're never going to be able to get a project up and running unless you're willing to do the dirty stuff, I guess, get your hands dirty. So I guess we're getting close now to some kind of steady state here. Absolutely higher, I guess. And typical convention we have here is to use the two side bits. Don't ask me why, but it's always been that way. Two side bits first before you use the middle one. Probably just a silly convention, but it's been that way, and it appeases my OCD. So we'll continue to do that for now. Right, so that should more or less, I mean, this is not very nice, but you get the point of it, the gist of it. It's just difficult. I think the problem with the UI is that sometimes there is no actual right position to put things in. And because of that, and because I'm OCD, my brain has to go through all the possible permutations until it satisfies itself that actually the current one is not that bad. Sadly. Which then means that we have to go through this process for a few minutes until I'm satisfied that actually the current state is okay. Okay, so I think this will do. So as you can see here, we're just replacing these strings with the new strong types. I'll make this a bit smaller, although to be honest we don't really need to. There's plenty of space for the one at the bottom, but implies that this is not done properly. Yeah, so I mean, Dia is a great project. It's a shame that it's been sort of a bit neglected, really. Since the maintainers moved away from the project, we never really got another maintainer. But at the same time, this is another property of software that I think is quite an interesting property. I mean, Dia works perfectly well for what it does. And whilst there is no active maintainers, or at least there hasn't been any releases for a while, well, it works, right? And a lot of us are using it, and we're using it, and it works quite well. We are, of course, afraid that at some point we won't be able to use it anymore, mainly because the distros are not willing to ship GTK2 anymore. Nothing to do with Dia, really. But, of course, you can imagine there must be security issues and things like that related to GTK2, which is a very old toolkit now, given that we're approaching GTK4 now. And so I can see why, say if you're Debian, you're probably not willing to continue to ship 10-year-old software that hasn't gotten any updates, other than some translations or something like that. But at the same time, from a user perspective, and I think we forget a lot of times that users are different from developers. And as a developer, I can perfectly well understand the reasons for Debian to decide what they've decided, which is probably that at some point they'll have to remove Dia. But as a user, it's very strange to me to say that a piece of software that works perfectly well, doesn't give me any trouble, I used it for over a decade, it does exactly what it needs to do, with its limitations, but of course it does work. And now suddenly I will not be able to use this piece of software anymore purely because distribution is now not willing to ship the libraries it depends on anymore. It's very difficult to explain that to a regular non-programming user. Of course you're going to say, oh yeah, you can always get the snap, or you know, there's other places, or I mean, I'm installing it from archives at the moment because I don't really like the patches that they've done to stable Dia. In fact, it's broken some of my workflows. But I still find it quite confusing. I still find it difficult, like any other user, that suddenly it's things that I relied on are no longer available, mainly for technical reasons. This is the world we live in. There we are. Presumably this is the last. So as a quick summary of what we just did there, with a T there, I think. So we went through every element repository. Each of these, maybe it's worthwhile actually giving a quick overview of the logical model is doing here. So the logical model is made up of a whole load of meta types. Now we don't really use the word meta quite a lot because it just gets confusing, but these are basically types that are going to get instantiated in user diagrams. And the idea of the meta model or the logical model is to try to capture the most common patterns you see in source code. And so, of course, in structural, which is not the best of names, but it's the name we've got things like the things you're used to, such as object, which represents a class, a module, which represents a package, enumerations, and so on. This is what you're used to. But as you can see, there's a load of other stuff that you may be not so used to. For example, the decorations, that exist in most source files. Stuff to do with variability. This is a bit complicated to explain, but it's basically the idea that you can configure things at runtime in the code generator. And 2, as you can see, the LCD is triggering again. And so on, right? And so all sorts of weird and wonderful things are available here. And one thing we need to do as well is we need to go to these helpers and start deleting some of these. So there shall be no name factory, no name builder, no location builder, even the string processor. I wonder. This is really not a very good name, but I suspect it's string processor. So we have a pretty printer here. Yeah, this generates identifiable names. I'm pretty sure we've done a replacement for this thing. I'm gonna guess here and assume that we've got rid of that. Name tree builder. Of course, we haven't got any name trees. Now decoration will move later. I think if I just quickly go here, we see all of that. Hopefully we see a node. Quite worryingly, there is. Right, the legacy name tree parser is there as well. And the new name tree parser would also be there. I'm not sure if anyone is using the building error. Let's leave it there for a second. Configuration model set adapter, stereotypes helper. Now I think we didn't go as far as stereotypes just yet. We did try to stop this before it went even crazier than it's already gone. So I think I'll leave stereotype helper here for a second. Decoration definitely should not touch. And then I think the rest is just regular logical stuff. The pretty printer as well. So as you can imagine, by the time we're finished with this, we're going to be removing a lot of types. The name flattener. I can't see anything with the name builder, so may just go out on the limb. Meta name factory. Can't see here, but I'm sure it must have moved it. And then we can leave the mappings. Right, okay, so I'm gonna also go on the limb here and get rid of that. Righty, so don't think we need to worry about any of the features just yet. As you can see, there are no features here, so that's good. Right, so as you've seen, we just removed a whole lot of identification related stuff. Didn't touch any of the transforms, that's fine. And that's about that. Okay, now what's going to happen next is I'm going to try to generate this code. Now, I'm 100% certain this is not going to work, and because of that, we will enable logging. And if we just do generate Dogen.logical.dia, this is going to break with some kind of resolution error. And now all we need to do is to go up to the logs area. Don't really need this chap here. Logic, so in here, no, integration, build output using client 11. Right, around here we will have the log for the logical model. I mean, we could of course rely on the output of the compilation, and not exactly. We still have got a lot of work to do to make the compilation output a little bit more sensible. Now this is going to tell us everywhere we're using the wrong attributes. So stateful has an attribute which is not resolving. Let's have a look. So what we can do is we can just have a quick look at what the what's interesting, we found out. Oh, I see. This is actually not a bug. We can't see here, but there's more than one thing being dumped into JSON. There we are. So what we probably want, inherited attributes. Right, as you can see, inherited attributes as a name. And that should really be a logical name. Okay. And so again we go, keep doing this until our lovely code generator decides that you can find everything. So now we're breaking here. And the problem this time is base visitor. Base visitor. I didn't know that we had a base visitor actually. Let's have a look. I know we have a visitor. Where is a base visitor? Not too sure. Right, so we seem to be looking for a named tree. Oh, yes. I'm not sure about this base visitor business, but clearly all the references. Excuse me. And now, of course, we are going to notice that there are a lot of names all over the place. Perhaps the best thing to do is to just quite carefully go across these guys. Spot the word name. We do use the logical name almost everywhere. And particularly on the structural types. Right, okay. Now then, what we're going to do is we need some more space still. And move these guys around a bit. That doesn't look too bad. Righty, might be worthwhile just a quick scan. I mean, it's difficult to see things, to be honest. This is really where, if we had an LSP mode on a file and then just had like nice fly check errors showing you where all the problems were, you could resolve this in about 5 seconds flat. Now you can see, I mean, I'm moaning a lot about this graphical representation, but you can start to see why. It's just, life would be so much easier if we had a way of treating this like source code. But at least we get some hints as to what we're looking for. Still seem to be insisting that there is such a thing as a base visitor. missing something. Okay, I think I got an interruption. Let's pause the video for a second. Okay, sorry about that. Let's continue where we left off. Which was trying very hard. Let's make sure we're actually recording. It looks like we are. We were trying to get to the bottom of all these strange resolution errors, all connected to name. Suspect I can't remember what we did 10-15 minutes ago. Let's try to compile again. Alright, still some errors. Go up to the log file. Still related to name. Can you imagine? Okay, we are still with base visitor. I suspect what's happening here. This is actually it's just going to highlight the problem of one of the approaches that we took in the past. Very bad idea, as it turns out. So let's just have a quick look at, because you've seen the word base visitor. That seems a bit curious, isn't it? I mean, we have a type called visitor, but not a type called base visitor. I suspect, sadly, this is a bad design decision we had at the very beginning, where we had this notion of injecting types, and the problem with this type injection is that we just on the fly we just generate. Oh, here we are. This base visitor. But this is an actual C++ type, so doesn't look like we're doing anything here. So we had this bad idea a very long time ago. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go for area 8. What we'll do is we'll just do a quick search for this word. System sort of thing. In other words, it's kind of opaque to that. It may follow that, but it may not follow that, and the user has no control over it. Things like configuration, for example, where the user may want to say, I don't know, say for example you don't like the name visitor on your type, you want to call it something else, because you've taken it from the diagram. Now it's no longer possible for you to do something as simple as change the name, which is something that is a problem at the moment. Whilst this sounded like a really clever idea at the time, it did not stand the test of time, and so we are trying to get rid of it. Like many things in Dogen, we have so many other problems and things to deal with. We just haven't got the time to address these issues right now. I think we've done something here. I wonder if we can move visitable somewhere further down the line. Perhaps not. Well, problem of problems, I guess. Still not enough space, as you can see here. Now we're going to have problems soon, because as you can see here, we have to be very careful here that we don't change the inheritance semantics, otherwise we end up with a completely different diagram from what we've got right now. So what we'll do instead is we're going to shuffle things around a little bit. Stereotype can move all the way up there without causing too much trouble. Technical space. Of course, we don't want to be cutting across elements. What could fit around here? And see, now you're starting to see my dislike for the UI management of diagrams. This is not real. What we're dealing with at the moment are not real issues. These are just purely visual artifacts, and they are quite time-consuming. For you to get to a point where you're fairly satisfied with your diagram, it does require a fair number of manipulation, and it's time that doesn't really pay, because all you've done is you've got yourself into slightly less unhappy state. Didn't actually gain anything from a software engineering perspective. So it's really not ideal to have to deal with this. But at the same time, one must deal with what one has, not with what one wishes to have. So no point in complaining. See, particularly since we've already got fixes for all this stuff. It's just a question of finding the time to get around to doing them. Right, how are we going to address this problem? There's a lot of space for visitable. Well, let's go for the easy option. Let's just extend the diagram as required. Perhaps a bit too much there. Not going to be exactly the prettiest of solutions, but key thing is to address the problem at hand. So perhaps something like this. Okay. So we are hoping really that we're going to move to a text-based format within next couple of sprints really. So really the moaning and groaning that is probably not warranted given how close we are to it. The problem of course is that you can only start so many refactors at the same time, as we've learned to our great cost. If you find a problem and then whilst you're refactoring that problem find another problem and then suddenly distract yourself from the current refactor, try to solve the second problem, what you're going to find in the end is that you're going to end up with 20 different partially made refactors in your code base, and then instead of one problem you're going to end up with a lot more problems. We've had that problem for a while in Dogen, where we just bite more than we can chew, and now we have decided that until you complete one refactor you're not allowed to start another one, even if you're halfway through. I mean, I must say that of course we're not really following that rule very strictly, as you can imagine, because we are doing a refactor at the moment, and which is nothing to do with this, and we've already started a second refactor, which is the one you're currently watching in these videos. So we are not really very strict with our own rules, but at least we are doing it with the understanding that this is a really bad idea, and that you should never really be into 2 or 3 different refactors at the same time, because it just confuses things quite a lot actually. So there you are. We seem to have located a number of logical names that needed to be renamed. So we moved things around best we could. Not brilliant, but good enough. And then we are going to have a quick gander just to make sure we didn't miss anything else. Looks alright. Let's ignore this, go back to our compilation. So now we're going to have problems somewhere else, presumably still name, funnily enough. I wonder if there's anything to do with base visitor. No, they seem to have resolved this time round. It is so this is the attribute. Oh, physical facet. Okay, cool, no problems. So the physical facet. So this is a logical representation of the physical model, and as you can see here, we have a lot of things, very interesting things actually, because I forgot that we were copying and pasting something else. So the thing to keep in mind at the moment is that we are in the logical representation of the physical space. This is used for code generation purposes, and in here these are not actually mapping directly to the physical elements. These are just a representation of the physical elements. So for example, it'd be tempting, and I may even do this in the future, to call backend name and so forth to use the physical types. But because we are not really in physical space, that may actually confuse the issue more than it simplifies it. So we need to be very careful here. Make sure we don't lose the plot. It may make sense. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying that it's not just a case of coming here and replacing a few things. We will have to think this through before we break everything. At any rate, you see a lot of names going on here. Let's just address all of them. These are all logical names. Righty, okay, now again we have the usual problems, and once more I feel tempted to take the easy way out and just extend my namespace a little bit. It can be quite painful to try to address in any other way. So there you are, simple solution. And then we just have to move things around a little bit. It's quite a, as my young one would say, quite a satisfying thing in some ways to do our diagrams. Peculiar in some ways. It's very relaxing. So perhaps what we should do rejig things around here a little bit. Not too sure. Wondering if it's a better idea to make the archetype. Yes, sounds a bit better, doesn't it? So let's put the archetype to the side. And then what we can do is move things around a little bit. So this guy can now go here. Perhaps he can go down a little bit. And then right, so that's a little bit better. And then what we can do, of course, is just move relations to here. Solves some problems, causes others, but there you are. This is the dilemma of diagrams. Every time you think you solve the problem, you end up causing some other problem, and then the whole thing has a ripple effect, and then it takes you a while till the diagram settles again. But as I say, it does feel quite a relaxing exercise. Of course, if you were in a team and your team leader has got releases that he needs made, probably would not be best pleased to know that you're spending half your time finding diagrams pleasing. Clearly this is may not be the right solution for your production stressful project, but certainly for a part-time project, something to do on the side, it's not too bad. Right then, so we have the archetype on the side. This guy now can go to the middle. Things lined up best we can. And I think we've achieved some kind of balance. Right, let's see where else we've broken. There will be lots of name, to be honest. There's not going to be any surprises here. Question is just going to be where. This is a type that's used pretty much everywhere in the logical model, everywhere in other models. There's absolutely no way we can get away with this without lots of breakage. In the future, once I keep talking about this, but once we move to text mode and we have LSP and we have proper compilations, what we'll do is we'll have compilation errors that will tell you what all the types are, and we even have renames, so you can actually rename something in the diagram. Not sure I understand what's abstract profile. Okay. And so basically, the next release of the next major release of Dogen, we have lots of minor releases still to come, but the next major release of Dogen will all be about tooling, really. Once we've satisfied ourselves that our name tree is over there as well. Once we've satisfied that we've solved the fundamental design issues of which there are many, and we're happy enough with it. We shall turn our attention to tooling, and much of the stuff you're doing right now by hand, we're hoping we'll have someone to help you, some tool, give you a hand. Sadly, there's still quite a fair bit to go until we get there. But you know, that's exactly what side projects are for. These kind of exercises. Right, we need some more space again. Another quite annoying thing about diagrams is exactly this. You reach some kind of stability, only to find out that something else has to move, and then you have to change what you just fixed 5 seconds ago. Alas, here we are. So what we'll do now is we'll move this guy here to give us enough space so I can put the initializer at the top. Initializer can just go there, and then hopefully can rearrange this confusion. Not too bad, not perfect of course, but right, next set of names. This guy is the type registrar in serialization. There we go, a couple of names here. Oh, we somehow seem to have a reference to the logical entity's name. Not necessary to fully qualify them, but we were. No surprise there, another name. So I guess for the purposes of this video, our objective will probably just be to get the code generator to generate. And because I mean we are already probably into an hour, might be another hour or so. Mapping. Oh, interesting. Can't see any names in mapping. Ah, there it is. Destination. And so yes, you probably find that you're probably thinking that this is exactly not the most pleasant of activities. Of course, you're right. You know, this is mapping set on the helpers. But of course, one has to see the tool, one has to see the vision of the tool, I guess, versus the process. And what you're seeing at the moment is the process. The process of getting to the vision. Hopefully when the vision has been fully done, it will look slightly less crazy. But the steps in between are of course quite painful. Right, so what we'll do is we'll just have a quick look at all the stuff we got here. I'm sure it's going to be quite a few. Not necessarily going to worry too much about the non... Right, so these should really be logical IDs as well. Instead of strings. These types are also, you know, there still needs. There is so much refactoring required in this project. This is quite unbelievable, which is fair enough. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not disappointed about that. I think that the purpose of the exercise is to learn about a topic and Now, what are these names doing? Just a list, so list of pair. Not entirely clear. Now this is where things get a little bit iffy, because I'm going to put a logical ID here and it could be completely wrong. But I'm going to gamble on the logical ID. Because I think it should really be a logical ID. Name 3. Bit of noise coming from downstairs. Right, okay. Now remember, this is only the logical model, so see all these things here, these indices. These are definitely logical IDs are hiding here. It's somewhat satisfying, to be fair, to do these kind of changes, because you are seeing an improvement in the code base. It's painful, particularly when you're trying to get on with some of the other stuff, but on the plus side, it is satisfying to see the code that's becoming a little bit closer to the actual model, the domain that we are trying to model. And it's not easy, of course. Nothing in programming is easy, so there you are. Right, so I reckon that these translations are also logical ID, so let's just get cracking with that. Pretty much everything around here is going to be a logical ID, I think. A few things are meta IDs, but presumably similarly to this agnostic ID. Not too sure, to be honest. This one is a bit tricky. Of course, this is what's going to happen over the next however long this is going to take. We're going to have to go through all the code, see what's being used and how, and try to make sense of the madness. Okay, still some names. Let's have a look at the log. The log is telling us the model itself has a name, of course. What's really to do with nameable? Nameable, I believe, was already addressed. And it was indeed. So did we just make something very silly a second ago? 1 second, let me just go back to the change I did. Logical name, logical ID, I think looks alright actually. These things are so similar, especially when doing so many of them. You start getting slightly confused. So we seem to think there's a problem with model. Okay, we already see that meta name is a problem. So here we want, okay, seem to have copied something from compilation. But this exercise should give you some idea how complicated the whole thing is going to be from beginning to end, how long it's going to take us. Not exactly trivial. Anything else in the model that could... Oh, there we are. Leaves. This is just a logical name. The leaves of the model tell us the types that have no descendants, that are part of an inheritance relationship. And that's that. Okay. Let's see where the next error is. Oh, here. No, still updating Emacs. Slogs are probably getting quite big now. Still a problem with model apparently. Let's just make sure it's still name. So we think there is another name somewhere, model. So I think it might be meta nameable. We must have forgotten to update meta nameable somewhere. No, we did. Okay, that looks good. Quite interesting. Are we sure this is really model? Dogen logical entities model. Okay, and the attributes where the problem is coming from is this guy here. The attribute name is references. Ah, bingo. Okay. Let's try again. Yeah, so as you can imagine, here we are, generated. So what we'll do is we will go to our first commit. You can see it's not going to be a particularly pretty commit. A lot of changes here. A lot of deletions. So for this one, we will just get rid of these things. Now then, let's just call this temp commit. Okay, so the next problem we're going to have, as you can imagine, is there's many models that depend on the logical model, particularly the text models, which will also make use of things like name. These will also cause problems, so we have to work through them now. So the first one is the text, and we'll have quite a few. Now, okay, what we can now do, which will save us a fair bit of time, because now there is absolutely no ambiguity about what we mean by name, we can quickly go over to our grep area, and we can just go to the models and do a quick grep. For this we really want grep, and we can just say locate me all of my logical names recursively, and you see this is now showing me all the places where logical name is being used. And then, thanks to Emacs's cleverness, we can say please update that to now be that, and Emacs will go away and update all these models. Now we just have to make sure we close the text models and open them again. To make sure we pick up the change. Now these models will not look very nice for now. Reason being that interesting. Snapping to grid. Logical entities. No, so this did not work. Let's try again. Okay, that seems to be gone okay. Let's just double check to make sure that we are opening the right models. Dogen models, that's correct. So text. Now if I look at the name here, okay, these look better. Logical name. Snap to grid is no longer there. Okay, so now if I look for CPP, quick check. Again, as you can see here, all the things have moved a little bit. That's just basically because Dia does not quite know what to do with the the rename that we've done on the text files. Similarly in here, you should also see some funny business going on. Not too bad, but as you can see all the logical names have been updated. Righty, so now then, what would happen if we attempt to, well, I don't know, let's just generate all models. See what breaks. Surprisingly, nothing broke. Fair bit of changes. Righty, so as usual, we will do one of our temp commits. Cool. Now then, not sure if we should stop now. 1 hour and 8. Let's keep going. Right, so what we've achieved so far is we've managed to get Dogen. We've removed the existing types that we had representing identification in the logical model, and we've made use of the new types. It was very painful, but we managed to convince Dogen in the end to do the right thing. However, of course, this is only the beginning of the trip, because now we have to get the logical model to compile first. And this is at least where we are in the world of, well, normal developer tools, so not quite as bad. So we can just start compilation. Could be a lot of errors. We just let it go through, it doesn't really matter. In a second what we'll do is we'll, here we are. So we take one of these guys here, and then we could do exactly what we did a second ago, which is to go to our grep and say, please locate all of these. It'll give us a number. Now we know this is going to be probably called logical name builder. Presumably. Somewhere around here we should have a logical name builder. Logical name builder, there it is. So in theory, we should just be able to say, change this to a grep mode, and wherever you see that guy, go to identification and call logical name builder. Then we can simply save. This is going to then trigger the opening of every single file using the LSP mode. Which then means it takes a bit longer than expected, but it's not too bad. Okay, doc. So now then, we've located a whole lot of logical name builders, and then what we can do is, for good measure, because we know what these guys are, what we can now do is to say, well, we know that logical name builder is going to be a problem. What's the easiest way to look for all the name builders? Perhaps just search for name builder, presumably. Righty. It's a few. Now you just have to be very careful here, because as you can see there's a lot of stuff that's not related to this. So you don't want to be pulling things that you don't mean to. So let's try another grep. Let's try helpers name builder. Right, this is a bit better. Now then, everything that's under the logical model is probably what we're looking for. So what we can do is quite simply just basically say, well, let's have a look at what's going on here. So this guy is going to be identification helpers logical name builder. And that solved our problem, but as you can see it's a bit long-winded, isn't it? So let's just create a variable for this guy. It's all statics really, but shouldn't really cost us anything. And Right, so now we have a type with an ID. So we have two things to do here. This is one of the problems we have at present. And this is going to be a logical ID. So we need to ask the identification model in IO entities, and we need logical IO. Okay, and that's going to help us with that problem there. So now if I just go back to fly check, really there's not much else to it really. What we tend to do around here is to just look for these errors. We know what the fixes are, apply the fixes, move to the next one, and so forth. Probably an easy way of doing this, but right, so let's just have a look at what this QN is. I think that should be about right. Although it's not particularly happy. Clang. Yeah, that should be fine. Not sure why Clang's not happy with that. One thing I've noticed as well is that once you start making these really big changes, I mean these are monstrous changes really, hundreds of files, thousands of files in cases, you are really testing the ability of the LSP server to cope with a lot of changes. And to be fair to ClangD, it's actually coped really well. I mean, I've been battering it to death with absolutely insane refactorings. However, it's done alright. Most of the time seems to survive. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is going to be to say look for entity's name. I think this is another safe one. So if I just look in projects, logical, if we just do a big massive grep for entity's name, yeah, as I thought, we'd see a lot of stuff like this. So in this sort of cases, what one can do, not always, as you can see for example here, these tests, they need to be deleted manually. So I go to tests and look for legacy and the new name tree parser. Right, just to double check, we have moved these across to identification. Ah, there are no tests here yet. Okay, so we can't actually just delete that. Okay, fine, let's just go to identification, create a tests directory, and then let's just mark these as for whatever reason we don't seem to be able to go into it. That's not a problem. Right, so now we got rid of those two spurious ones. Pretty much everything else you see here are going to be references to the old entity's name, which then means that we can quite easily grab all of this in one go. So I'm just going to say, well, whenever you see entity's name, go for a logical, no, go for identification, entity's logical name. And that should more or less be right. Of course, you're now going to say, this is a bit coarse-grained. I mean, how do we even know this? Not making mistakes here. Well, the way you know it is by having a lot of tests, I guess. The tests are going to give you some confidence that your refactoring didn't screw up the world. Sadly, that's the only thing you can do. Then at some point you go back to compilation and you try again. Of course, you're going to have a next batch of errors, and of course you're going to notice a pattern. Name factory. So what is the new name for the name factory? Presumably logical name factory. Here we are, logical name factory. So let's rinse and repeat. Let's look for a grep window. And in here we could probably just grep across the board. Sadly, this is also involving a few models, which is actually not a bad thing, to be fair. Though I do not want auto-saves here, so let's just save all of this. Right, as you can see, we have few references in the model for that type, for that name, and then lots of it in code. So I think it's safe enough. We'll grab it again, and then let's just say we'd like to replace that. To be honest, let's just not put the quotes in. It's probably not needed. So let's say we replace that with identification. Logical name factory. And then we save this. Of course, there's much better ways of sort of I wonder if I could just search for helpers. There's of course much better tooling that would enable you to rename and so on. I mean, this is really a old school way of renaming. I guess no one does this these days. I could have written a Clang wrapper tool or something like that. However, sometimes it's easier to just brute force things, I think. So, identification. To be honest, I may just we'll grab this as well. Sure. As I say, sometimes LSP just goes a little bit crazy with so many changes in one go. Sometimes it's actually really telling you. So identification helpers logical name factory. Let's have a quick look. Is that really correct? Helpers logical name builder. Oh, logical name factory. Apologies. Logical name factory. Logical name factory in helpers identification. That looks fine. Interestingly enough, we don't seem to be. See, there is a bug here. We may have left. Okay, so this is the kind of thing where search and replace is a bit dangerous. We probably screwed things up. So let's just try this again. I think we left a quote somewhere. Well, we did. So what we need to now do is to fix these quotes. Because the files are already in memory, it's a bit quicker now. Okay, that looks a bit better. Now let's go back to where we were. So, right, so then, now we have to just think for a second. So we start off with the name. For starters, they shouldn't even be qualified. we should be calling, let's see, if you're a logical name, you have an ID. So you could easily just say ID, which as you can see simplifies things quite dramatically, because now we can just basically say supply me with an ID, object not found, ID no problems, and then ID of value. And here you can very simply just say please give me why can I not see any IO? Interesting enough, I'll find, let's go for that one. What I really want is identification logical IDIO. This is what I want. Yep. Now of course one of the side effects of all this refactoring via grab is the code will look very messy. This is nothing we can do. So what we need to do is, as we open up files, we're starting having a look and start to see what the files look like. And over time, hopefully, what will happen is that we will... we forgot one thing here. Over time, hopefully, what will happen is that these files will get mopped up, and cleaned up, and made presentable again. Because WooGraph doesn't have any cleverness, really. Of course, you would say, why don't you use in Clang format? And we should really be using Clang format, but we're not at present. So, right. So, what are we doing then? As we did a second ago, we probably should just do a quick search for the factory that we used. Let's just look for logical name factory, save us some time. And yeah, so this is kind of the exercise. It's not particularly exciting. So we know wherever we're calling logical name factory, there's probably going to be some kind of problem. I find that this header resolution in Clang D11 is actually very good. In fact, in general, Clang D11 is amazingly good, really. It's getting to the point now where there's very few complaints I have with it now. And to be honest, if I actually spend more time using the tools, I probably would find much cleverer ways of doing these kind of refactors, because Clang obviously comes with rename, project-wide renames and so on, and it probably will be quite easy to do this sort of stuff using Clang tools. But as with everything in life, there's only so many hours in the day, and since our job is not really to be a Clang expert, but to see if we can get this project going, we end up not having the time to develop more skills in that level, that department. Qualified representations builder. That sounds about right. Dogen dot identification types. No, can't be types helpers. Okay, that would help. And Dogen dot identification slash types helpers. Qualified representation builder. Right, that should address that problem. Oh, another great thing about Clang is just how easy it is to move from one file to another. It's just, I think that both the LSP guys and Clang guys have done such a great job. To think that a few years ago all of this used to be so difficult, And now it's just so easy. It used to be quite painful to try to, you know, for those of us that have been around for long enough, you remember playing with Emacs and things like CDET and things like that. We should really be calling these LN for logical name, but to be fair, we are in the logical model, so now it's quite trivial, really. Sadly, we can't just search and replace for all of these, because some cases we do want the qualified name. Not always, but sometimes. I think we need to fix the indentation here. Some of this is very old codes, not very nice, but still works. So. I think here there's quite a clear pattern actually. It does seem that all we're doing is obtaining these IDs. And finally is the factory we're looking for. So identification, entities, I think it's really helpful actually. See, these are the kind of things that now happen so seldom, these kind of errors. It resolves the type and it normally deletes everything and puts everything in the right places and so on. Which makes me sometimes notice a lot more actually when things don't happen exactly as you'd expect. Funnily enough, the better that LSP node gets, the more you notice when there's a tiny problem. Paradoxically. And so we go. Not entirely sure how interesting this video is going to be now because it's a lot of work like this really. Not really glamorous work, as I said before. Sometimes you just have to do the graft, the hard graft. So ue.id, probably just call that ID, I should think. The other thing as well that I find quite impressive about LSP is just how responsive it's become. I mean, you have to bear in mind I'm not even using Emacs 27. This is Emacs 26.3. And you already can see that I'm not really struggling at all. I'm tapping more or less at usual speed. More or less. Maybe a bit slower because I'm trying to think. But and I'm talking as well, so perhaps not quite full speed, but fairly fast. Fairly normal, I'd say, if not fast. And LSP is copying. Right, okay, I can see this is going to be quite a long-winded sort of exercise now. There's probably not a lot of value to continue this in the video. You get the gist of it. I will stop the video now. What I'll do is I'll continue trying to just get all the basically this current task, which is to go through the models and get everything compiling. And once we get to the point of diffs and so on, I'll start another video discussing that, because that will be slightly more interesting than just more of the same really. So I'll stop the video now. Thanks for watching.